Before we get into today's deep dive, just a heads up that we'll be discussing eating disorders and more specifically some of the triggers that exist for eating disorders in the social media world. So if you don't feel up to listening to that today, this might be one to miss.
And we spoke on the podcast last year about these talks that had been convened in Parliament House. They were called roundtables, and the idea was that they were bringing together people with lived experience of eating disorders, survivors, advocates, and social media bosses. Can you just give everyone a bit of a refresher as to what actually went down?
Yep. So in September, as you mentioned, we had all these stakeholders meeting in Canberra to talk about eating disorder rates in young people and specifically the relationship between young people, eating disorders and social media. So the panel, the roundtable, coincided with the release of new research from Melbourne Uni, which found TikTok shows over 200% more appearance-based videos, over 300% more videos about dieting, and over 3,000% more videos about eating disorders to people with an eating disorder than those without.
Wow. I feel like there's a lot to unpack there about, algorithms and how information is served up. So we will dive into that shortly. But I do just, before we go on, want to understand a bit about the context to eating disorders in Australia. What do we understand about the scale of the issue?
So the Butterfly Foundation and the National Eating Disorder Advocacy Group charity, they released a report in February which found more than 1.1 million Australians are currently living with an eating disorder. And that's a 21% increase on data from 2012. So the Butterfly Foundation also pointed to a specific rise in eating disorders among young people. So the 15 to 19 age group, that is now the most likely age group to have an eating disorder, whereas in 2012, it was people aged 20 to 24 who were most likely.
Okay, so it's clearly a really prevalent issue and deeply concerning that age cohort is getting even younger. How does that tie into the specific roundtable conversations that happened in Canberra?
So Zoe Daniel is an independent federal MP. She actually led the initiative after concern about the prevalence of eating disorders and growing questions about, this role of social media, its relationship with body image and harms to young people. So she launched this roundtable with the Butterfly Foundation in September, and that facilitated talks between lawmakers, advocates and Meta, which owns, of course, Facebook and Instagram.
And from that, they formed a series of working groups, and they've been away working on policy changes and potential levers that government and the platforms could pull to keep young people safer online, particularly when it comes to body image and body dissatisfaction.
Something I've picked up, you've said Meta quite specifically, but you referred earlier to the fact that TikTok is showing these really elevated levels of disordered eating content. Why was TikTok not there?
So this was a really noticeable absence and one that was discussed at the time. We actually spoke to Varsha Yajman. She's a youth mental health advocate. She was part of the round table. And here's what she told TDA at the time.
Yeah, it was quite concerning that TikTok wasn't there, considering they have over 1 billion users now and also are really playing a big role in perpetuating disordered eating, body image issues, and eating disorder behaviors as well. So I really do think that they should take some ownership and recognize that they hold such a great amount of power.
Okay, so that was September, and we're now at the end of May, and we've got this list of recommendations from the panel. What has that panel actually said? What did all of this work kind of amount to?
So there are 21 recommendations that have been handed down this week, and they span a few key areas, including themes like changes targeting social media algorithms, as well as legislative reform. So proposals to actually change the law to make social media a safer place for young people at risk of eating disorders. And it is worth saying here that while Meta participated in those discussions, in those meetings in Canberra, its representatives didn't contribute to the recommendations list. Now, this is because Meta said it would be a conflict of interest.
Hello, I'm James and I produced the video you're watching. If you're enjoying what you're watching, we'd love it if you considered subscribing and checking us out on our other platforms. It'd really help in getting the word out about what we're doing here at TDA. Thanks very much. And now back to the deep dive.
So I'll take you through some of the proposals that stood out to me. One included giving Australian authorities more powers to demand social media platforms remove pro-eating disorder content.
Talking about the removal of content, the only other time I've heard that has been in the context of the eSafety Commissioner taking down violent content. Are we talking here about the same powers, that
Yes.
eSafety Commissioner?
Exactly. So it would be about giving the eSafety Commissioner, more powers to compel social media platforms in the same way as, like you're saying, with violent content, to take that content down, that pro-eating disorder content.
What actually is pro-eating disorder content?
So the roundtable experts actually did define this content as anything that glorifies or encourages eating disorders or extreme weight loss, or even content discussing low BMI. So that's body mass index. It's a metric that's been broadly criticised by plenty of organisations, including the Butterfly Foundation themselves, as being this kind of outdated and even harmful metric. But we do still see social media content kind of spruiking BMI.
That is the, specific content that people might be finding themselves. But another matter here is algorithms, right? Because what you choose to access and what you are shown or given is another matter altogether.
Yeah, and we can't have a conversation about social media
Without
algorithms.
Yeah.
So the panel did recommend this idea of functions on social media platforms. So technology that would be built into apps to allow users to filter out harmful material from their social media feeds. The emphasis here is on making it easier for users to do that. So whether or not you can filter certain things out from your feed at the moment, that might not be abundantly accessible or clear to a lot of users. So this recommendation emphasized making it really easy for someone to scroll to the top of their feed, hit a button and opt out of something quickly. Platforms, in terms of algorithms, would also, under these recommendations, be required to improve the diversity of the types of bodies that users are seeing in their feed, what the algorithm is serving up.
You did mention there that the panel had focused on improving outcomes for young people specifically. Were there any age-specific recommendations though?
Yeah, so there were several proposals specifically targeting users under 18. And one of the most interesting recommendations to me was this one that included calls to restrict young people's access to beauty filters.
I think this is so interesting.
Isn't this? Yeah. So this idea is that anyone under 18 would not be able to access the filters on TikTok and Instagram that, as we've all seen, change the shape of your face, change the shape of your features, the size of your features, the colors of your features, your eyes, your hair, everything, the plastic surgery look of all these filters that people just commonly use.
So what actually happens from here with these recommendations?
Yeah. So Zoe Daniel, the independent MP, we actually heard some of her voice at the top of the episode. She launched the panel and will now present the findings to federal government ministers across relevant departments. So health, mental health, communications, to, in her words, have a look at the recommendations and see what lawmakers think is workable and practical that will make a difference to people.
I mean, ultimately the power lies with the government. What have they said?
So the Federal Communications Minister, Michelle Rowland, has welcomed the recommendations. She said that the government wants to reduce the harm caused by social media, and that doubles down on the message that we've heard from the government over recent weeks. Rowland said that the government is currently reviewing the Online Safety Act. That's the legislation that sets out sort of protections for users online. And that will include looking at how to address body image. Yasha Vajman, the lived experience advocate who we heard from a little earlier, she's responded to the recommendations and told TDA that she wishes she could have had her social media algorithm diversified at the peak of her eating disorder. She said that algorithms can make young people feel like they can't escape from diet-related content.
It's really important that we're holding people accountable who actually have the authority and the power to do something.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If this episode has brought up anything for you, you can always contact the Butterfly Foundation on 1-800-334-673. It's 1-800-334-673. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back again tomorrow.